to this diversity and inclusion session. My name is Corina. I'm the co-founder of a company called Innovation Partnership. We're a membership organization for C-suites and board members of large organizations. And I'm going to be chairing today's panel. Thank you all for staying for this session, and I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful discussion. Today, joining me on this amazing panel is Tracey Shelley. She's the CEO. Oops. Right?
That was a good start.
Good start. Yeah. So Tracey is the CEO of BCECA. It's Engineering Trading Association. We've got Roni Savage. She's the CEO of Jomas, Environmental and Engineering Specialists. We've got Russ. He's a founder of Tech London Advocates, a network of tech leaders and entrepreneurs. And we've got Mimi Zhu. She's the co-founder of De-Risky, an AI-powered solution for businesses to identify and address disputes with stakeholders. So I'm going to go straight into it, and I'm going to ask my panel the first question. What are some of the tangible benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion? We've got a lot of reports out there in terms of the benefits for organizations, but Roni, if I go to you first, sort of very briefly, it'd be good to kind of tackle that first before we go into some of the solutions and some of the tips for our audience.
Absolutely, thank you. Firstly, diversity is important because it's the right thing to do. That's the first thing. Everybody who is talented and who is willing to work hard should have the opportunity to follow whatever career that they choose to. So it's absolutely the right thing to do. But when you look at the research that's been done over the past number of years, especially the McKinsey report, which demonstrates that companies who have diversity work better, perform better. So, you know, you've got a diverse number of people around the table. It brings that diversity of thought, which enables innovation, enables creativity. And those companies actually have been demonstrated to perform at least 25% better than their competitors. So, you know, it's not about ticking boxes and our CSR. Companies actually do perform better if they have diversity around their workforce. So that's the second point. So I know it's supposed to be quick. Thirdly, and speaking specifically for the construction industry, which is where I work, I run an engineering company serving the construction industry. I work in an industry where 12% of the workforce is female, 4% is of ethnic background, but we're suffering from skill shortages. It's tough recruiting, finding the right person to recruit. But I work in a country where 50% of the population is female and 14% is of ethnic minority background. So it only makes sense that if we have skill shortages, that what we should do is attract diversity into our companies. So what we've got to do is move away from the divisive conversations around diversity. I'm sort of mixing them both up at the moment. Divisive conversations around diversity. It's not taking work from one and giving it to another. It's actually enabling our companies to perform better. It's plugging our skill shortages. So ultimately, we're working for the greater good of everybody, rather than it being us, one person against the other. So that's the benefit of diversity.
Thank you. And Mimi, I'd love to ask you the same question if you'd like to contribute to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree with Roni. And our company is actually, I don't know why, but it is actually led by women. So in fact, we're just growing our team, and the best applicants are actually women graduates. We're hiring a few graduate positions from computer science, from economics, finance. So, you know, being in tech, like often we assume that it is male-dominated, and in many respects it is. We will do a raise in the next 12 months, and we've already been told, you know, the challenges with diversity in, and I'm sure Russ can add more, in Silicon Valley. I think only 2% of VC funding still goes to, still goes to women. Only 20% goes to women co-founders. So there's really a lot that needs to be done with everything that Roni said about the benefits of diversity from a business perspective, not just from a moral and legal perspective. I think businesses are missing out. And certainly, I absolutely echo what she said about diversity in perspectives and experiences. Perhaps sometimes the diversity debate becomes lost because we talk about, affirmative action for women or people of, like cultural minority backgrounds. And both, these hats I've worn all my life in the countries I've lived and grew up in. But actually, we want to talk about diversity in experiences and views. And I think those identities that I have as a woman of ethnic background in the countries I grew up in have shaped some of those views that are actually valuable. And like, I grew up with both Western culture and Chinese culture. When I was younger, I tried to turn away the Chinese culture because none of the kids at my school in Australia spoke, there weren't any Chinese kid. And I'm just glad that my parents encouraged me to go to Chinese school, and I was always really proud of my heritage. Despite actually racism that I experienced as a young child in Australia, we lived in a pretty white and quite racist part of Australia, and it really shaped my, I think, worldview of the importance of embracing people from different backgrounds, and also the kind of benefits a company, any organization, would gain from that diversity. So, so that's where
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to my next question. I've got quite a few, so I'd like to get through as many as possible. What are some of the initiatives companies can implement to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion? Tracey, I'm going to go to you first.
Okay, thank you. I think COVID, the last 2 years, have given us some real positives in terms of the workplace, particularly in my sector. We are part of a world, an industry that required presenteeism. You had to be in the office. It was very much about working long hours. There was also a lot of travel and overseas visits in order to work on projects. And literally overnight, obviously, all of that stopped. And what we saw was the ability for the industry to continue to function, and function actually very efficiently and effectively from home. And that enabled large sections of the workforce to actually engage more, because there wasn't this requirement to be in the office, to work very long hours, to travel. And so what we have seen is that ability for women in particular to take on roles within the companies that perhaps previously they wouldn't have been able to do, but also people that perhaps have caring responsibilities or health issues to also engage. And that's been very positive. My concerns now are we're coming out of COVID, we're moving back into a situation where people are returning to the office. We need to ensure we don't switch off that pipeline. We need to provide that flexibility. We need to offer the opportunities to that wide diversity of employee to engage and participate. So that to me is really important. I think also it's about providing the flexibility. It's about providing that inclusivity within the workplace. And also, I think one of the things when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we often forget about the men as well. And actually, we find that we spend a lot of time focusing on initiatives for the minorities, and we put things in place that often don't include the men. And one of the things that we have seen, again, over COVID, men have had that opportunity to have flexibility, to spend time with their families, and again, they want that. So I think it's about inclusivity. It's about the whole workforce and making everybody feel that it's okay to have that flexibility, to be able to balance home life and work without feeling guilty.
Yeah.
I think that's a big issue. I've found in my own career, when we started a family, my husband took on more of the childcare responsibilities because his hours were shorter than mine, on the basis that he wasn't travelling in the way that I was. But actually, much of what he was doing was under the radar. He couldn't be seen to be doing that because it wasn't acceptable for men to have that flexibility, take on childcare. So although he's done it, that's given me the space to expand my career, he's had to do it under the radar, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we have diversity and inclusivity.
Thank you. And in addition to the flexibility you mentioned, are there any other initiatives companies are doing to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion? And perhaps a question to all the panel, if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing companies are doing a lot of work, mainly through employee resource groups. So they will have a wide range of initiatives that look at perhaps bringing more females in, or perhaps more ethnic minorities. My concern is that those initiatives can often end up operating in silos and not be embedded within the culture of the organisation. So I think it's really important that these initiatives come from the very top of the organisation so that they are embedded and everybody's fully engaged.
Can I pick up on
Yeah,
that last
please
point?
do.
But before I do, I want to reinforce what Roni and Mimi were saying. This is a group of business leaders. The business case has been proven.
Yeah.
Case closed, okay? McKinsey, KPMG, so many organizations have proven that diverse organizations, diverse boards, diverse management teams are more successful. They build better products and services, they're more profitable. I think what we need to do is go deeper on, if we're all rational beings and get that, why is the needle not moving? Why are less than 1% of black female founders getting funding from VCs? What are the root causes of the problem? Then linking that to what you've just said, and to a question that I asked of Ronan and Kate during their session this morning, what's going on in the boardroom? What is the CEO of the company doing to really walk the talk? And I'm going to be very honest with all of you, there's too much talking the talk going on. There's too much BS from the people that I've met. When you look at their reports on diversity, when you look at this, you look at that, it's like, who is really driving the change? And I do really believe it has to come from the CEO, empowered by the board, so that she or he is seen by the rest of the organization as really believing in the diversity and inclusion agenda. You know what? We all believe this, or we think we believe this, but it's not happening. I'm sure all of you have been on these panels for a while.
Yeah.
We've got to move the needle. Why is it not happening? Is it because white men feel threatened in the boardroom to bring more women or more people of color or people with disabilities into the leadership of the organization? We know the business case says it's very different. So these are some of the things that we have to look at. And there are organizations, and I always say to people, I don't think this is rocket science. It's about, employee acquisition and employee retention. And, I like to say, look, if you're out there and you're building a product or service, or you've missed your financial metrics, there's going to be an audit of what went wrong. If you haven't met your D&I numbers, is there that equivalent audit? Are we really taking this seriously? So you're probably sensing a little bit of frustration here, but it is, I don't think it's time to be nice about this anymore. We're missing out too much. And those companies that are embracing it, who understand this, are the ones who are going to succeed, and good on them. Let's put them up on a pedestal and say, look what they've done.
Yeah.
But I'm not also afraid to name and shame those companies who are just doing this.
Yeah.
And there's too much of this
Russ,
going on.
that brings me very nicely into the question that I've prepared for you specifically. What examples, so let's sort of bring into a more sort of positive note, what examples of success can you share with us, of companies that have really improved their diversity, equity, and inclusion?
One example, and we did a Tech for Diversity event at the end of March. I didn't know about this until the event, but somebody was talking about what eBay did. And they just did something which I thought was brilliantly simple, which was they asked all of their line managers when vacancies were coming up to proactively go into the organization and encourage the women in the organization to apply for those internal vacancies. And over a period of 2 to 3 years, they have reported back that they've seen more senior women in their workforce in more senior levels. And they said when they looked at what they did, it was literally having people go into their workforce and saying, to the women in this area, the women in that area, you really should think about applying for this particular role. And many times the reaction was, oh, I didn't think I would be able to be qualified for that, or I didn't think that was something that the company would want me to do. But just by that proactive outreach from the line management into the organization, and I thought, that's something that any organization, large or small, can proactively do. So that's just one example that I wanted to share with the group.
Absolutely. Metrobank have done something similar in their job adverts. They've actually included a line, if you're a woman and you can do something like 40% of the job description, please apply. Because research has shown that women feel less qualified than men for certain roles, even though they could perfectly well be suitable to do the job.
I just want to raise another. These are some number of companies are doing this. I'm not going to name specific ones, but I talked earlier. I talked earlier this morning on AI and sort of the power of AI in being applied to different business functions. I recently advised the Recruitment and Employment Confederation of the UK on a toolkit in terms of removing bias in a lot of these AI-driven screening tools that many companies here probably use as well. And actually some of the companies I managed to interview was actually using some of these AI tools to promote diverse candidates. So the worry with these tools have been traditionally, the classic case was, I think, Amazon a few years ago, was they had to drop this project where they found that they just couldn't, like the AI CV screening tool were just not recommending women CVs. And actually even men's CVs that mentioned that they had something to do with women were excluded in the first round of the AI screening tool. So there's been a lot of concerns in the recruitment industry regarding, obviously, the bias that has worked against disadvantaged groups in the past. But I think what's really positive is that AI can be used for the good. And some companies are experimenting with AI tools that are actually screening for, I guess, keywords or experiences that are linked to someone with a more diverse profile. So I think that's a really great initiative that Tech for Good can bring to this important agenda.
Absolutely. I'd like to go back to a point that somebody on the panel mentioned earlier, and I think this is a really important question. How can men play an active role in helping women, and also people from all sorts of backgrounds, be more supported? Roni, I'll go to you first.
When you look around the board table, you've got a predominance of men around the board table making decisions on a daily basis. And in terms of who can really drive change, it's those who are making those decisions. So it's important that, and we've had conversations about this, it's important that those who are making those decisions in the first instance have an understanding of why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. They need to have an understanding of this. And going back to Russ's point about we know the benefits for our organisation, so why isn't this moving forward? I think that people don't have a full understanding of what these benefits really are, and that we allow, those at the top, allow the fact that they feel threatened to prevent their companies from progressing. So what we do need in the first instance is that understanding at the top table of what the real benefits are. When that happens, then it can start from the top down in terms of the culture around the organizations. And I go back again to the construction industry. The 12% of women has been around for so many years. And I think Tracey and I were talking about this from, 4 decades ago we were talking about 10%, and we're still at 12% 40 years later. We're talking about it, but it's not moving forward. And I think the only way that we can move forward is for those men who are at that top table to get a full understanding and to drive that change and drive the culture down the line, to get more women in the leadership. Because when you've got women in the leadership, it's fine to have, at the moment it's a box-ticking process. I've got 30% of women in my company. I've got 40% diversity, whatever the numbers are. But what position are those women in the company? What position are people from ethnic backgrounds in your company? Are they at the top where you're making those decisions? Because if they're not there, then that lack of understanding will continue. So that's where we really need to drive change. That's where we need to get men on board with this. We have lots of conversations around diversity, and it's great to have this sort of conversation, and there are lots of men in the room, but most of the panels that I speak on diversity is predominantly women in the room.
Yes.
We know the problem. We need men to attend these discussions. We need men to walk up to women and say, what are your challenges? How can we make this better for us to actually really drive that change? That's what we need.
Well said. And to build on that, I also think, and I'm speaking to the men in the room, take that chance, come to these events. My organization has a great Black Women in Tech group. And I was saying to Roni, we were together last week. I went to an event that they hosted in March, now that we're doing in-person events. There were about 50 people in the room. 47 were Black women, 2 were white women, and there was 1 bloke. That was me. And it was a really interesting experience. And I went up to Flavilla, who runs the group, afterwards, because there were some very emotional comments being made. So one of my takeaways was it was a safe space for Black women to speak about their frustrations, their pain, their anger, and sometimes their joy about things that have happened well for them. But then I also was saying to Flavilla, how do we get more men, and particularly white men, to hear these conversations? These events happen every month. And so, my commitment to her was to bring more men into the room, trying not to jeopardize the safe space, because that would also undermine what that group was doing. But at the same time, I felt if there were 8 or 10 men in the room hearing what's going on, hearing how company policy or directives or whatever can be interpreted in a very different way, it might get people to think differently, and maybe, to your point, start to get men to understand that they have a critical role to play in this. I often say men have an equal and probably an even greater role in this whole D&I journey to get the numbers back to what you were saying. Let's be reflective of the population. It's going to be a painful journey. Men and white men are probably going to lose out over time, but overall, that will benefit society, that will benefit many of these businesses. There are tough decisions that need to be made. There are tough policies that need to be made, but we've been talking about this. I get frustrated in the tech sector. It's a sector that's 80% white men. And we did a survey of our community. The good news is people feel like companies are trying harder than they were 5 years ago, but don't kid yourselves.
Yeah.
The needle has not moved for many years. And we might be here in another 5 or 10 years having the same discussion. That would be a travesty, but to the men in the room, you have a big role to play. You may not realize it, but you really do. And you can make such a big difference.
I think
Tracey, can I?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go
I
for
was
it.
just going to say that there needs to be some research done around perception and stereotypes as well. Just a very, very quick story. I was at another event in the lifts on the way down, and a female founder, got a text from a broker trying to sort out the VC for her. And in the text, which we read, said, sorry, they wouldn't give you money because you're of childbearing age.
Oh my God.
Can I just leave it there?
They need a
Says it
lawyer.
all.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Wow.
there is that perception that
My
a woman of a certain age, I'm not going to give her a job. She's going to go off on maternity leave for a year. I'm not going to give her money because the business is going to go under. Actually, you know, I've had 3 children. I took 3 months off work. I work really hard. You know, women can work really hard. They can have successful businesses and have children. And back to your point around men being given that opportunity to take time off so that it's not just the woman that's
Exactly.
at home taking
Exactly.
care of the kids.
Yeah.
Men can do it as well, and they should be doing it as well. So it enables women to go back to work, and it's changing that culture and changing the stereotypes and the perception that enables us to really drive the change that we need. Sorry.
Some companies offer that, but the men are not keen to take it.
No.
So what can we do about it?
I should push it more.
Yeah, like it
Definitely.
has to come from the top,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
the CEO was doing it, you know,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things building on that is recognizing that perhaps those people that do have families and want a bit more flexibility, perhaps want a part-time role, they need to be considered in terms of development and promotion opportunities within the company, because a lot of the time they're the people that do suffer because they've chosen to maybe work remotely, work part-time. They're overlooked for promotions, which means naturally you've got fewer women climbing the ladder and then available for those board positions. We've got to look at the workforce differently and recognise what's wrong with having a leader that works part-time.
exactly. Yeah.
Why can't they? You know, they work just as hard, they have as many skills and as much knowledge. That can be applied, the business can benefit from it. So, you know, we just need to change mindsets, I think.
Yeah, and I do hope that it will be a generational change that I think, you know, certainly at least students, the millennials that I teach, you know, I think there are, you know, new expectations about what organizations should offer in terms of work-life, not even balance, just that they can just be not just, you know, an employee. They can actually be, you know, a son. They can be a father or grandson, and that they can actually live their lives to the fullest extent, where it's not just about, you know, having a high-flying corporate career. I think the younger generation, because age keeps coming up, so I'm just saying, I think the younger generation is having different expectations. So, yeah, just want to echo everything here.
Thank you. I'm going to take some questions now from the audience. Who has the first question? Gentleman here at the front.
Yeah, hi. I think there was a discussion over AI and
Yes.
also metaverse, its impact on diversity. I think these
Yes.
are very interesting topics. With AI, I think, first of all, before we introduce AI to a company, it's my personal view, is to ensure that we rewire the CEO, managing director, the board views on diversity. And because if you introduce the wrong AI that goes into a black box and chooses the wrong people, you know, you
Yeah.
fit every data of men only,
Yeah.
so the HR will only pick up men
Exactly.
in the CVs that was sent.
Yeah.
That is the black box, that it will open a Pandora box. The whole thing will collapse. The whole idea of that CEOs had to introduce AI. With metaverse, of course, you know, people of different origins can come as any avatar, any background. Nobody will notice their background. They could be anybody. So I think there is an element that these technologies can bring. But again, as I said, you have to rewire the CEO's mind first.
Absolutely.
I think
Thank
the
you.
question is,
Do you have a question
salary,
for the panel?
Salary as a, I was before. Salary as a KPI. How much is salary? It drives diversity in terms of reporting salaries as a KPI, so that the board knows that if they run a curve through the company, there are certain people that are perhaps have got potentials, but they are at the lower scale in salary.
That's an interesting point, because research showed that women are very bad at negotiating their salary, right? So what can we do about it? I'm not sure if it's a question that you like to take, and would anybody like to take that? Or
I just want to say that actually in the UK, legally, there is pay equity reporting for a large organisation. So I think it's a step just kind of going into the role of government, because I still, I'm very fascinated about kind of the nudge theory, how government policies can kind of in some way encourage or discourage certain behavior by companies. And I think there needs to be more creative thinking about, like, regulation is not bad. Like, we have to start thinking about smart regulation. And in the area of equality and diversity and non-discrimination, I think the right policies from the government can encourage companies to really think about pay inequity by disclosure, transparency about salaries and the differences between men and women in these big organizations. So that's just one thing I want to mention.
I mean, just to build on that, I think it's great that the UK, and I think you have to be you're required if your company is more than 250 people to report the gender pay difference. I would like to see that go lower. I would also like to see that we have not just gender pay, but pay based on ethnicity, and to see the differences there, because I think people would be pretty horrified. So to me, that's one component. I just want to circle back to your comment around AI and the metaverse, if I can. There's a great piece in the New York Times, I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago, a woman who went into the metaverse who was assaulted in the metaverse. Yeah. And you just kind of think the bad behaviors that we're talking about here that we need to fix, are going to be replicated in the metaverse. So we have to be mindful of that. Your points about bias in data, we have to really make sure that we address that, because we're going to replicate this whole problem for another generation if we don't address it.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and please keep it brief, just so we've got time to answer it.
Thank you very much. I thought it was interesting what you said about the metaverse, similar to what happens with Instagram at the moment. But my question is around, I think it was Tracey mentioned about leaders working part-time, and I do a lot to empower women in the workplace, and I just wonder how the hell that's going to happen, because I think in essence it sounds amazing, but the reality is the further up you go into a senior role, you have more responsibility, so you either need to have a great team around you or have a way of being able to cope with that. So I just wonder how we could actually be serious ball breakers and leaders, but doing it part-time.
Thank you. Who would like to take that question?
Tracey.
I mean, as a business owner who has just taken one of my somebody into my senior management team who is a woman who works part-time, I know that you can make it work, and I'm doing it on a sort of small business scale, but you can make it work by building the structure of your team around that person, and that's what we've got to do to really drive diversity. I know it's hard and it's tricky, or seemingly so, but by structuring your team accordingly, you can make it work. I have a woman who's able to work 3 days a week. You have somebody else who works part-time side by side them. I mean, we can make it work. I think we have lots of excuses about lots of different things, but if I'm able to do it within a small organization, I'm sure that people can within large organizations.
Yeah, I just want to add also, really, like, this is maybe a radical idea, because, I mean, there's a lot, I've been to conferences where it's been debated, but maybe we need to rethink about what makes a successful CEO. If we're just measuring, because I used to practice as a corporate lawyer, and my targets were billable, like, hours. And, I was very, very good as a lawyer, but I wasn't prepared to spend, my evenings with clients or, doing briefs. So I think actually we need to radically rethink how to measure the performance of CEOs. I run a startup, and I've got amazing women around me. I think we were talking earlier, Russ, about burnout. Yep. Being an entrepreneur of a fast-growing like startup, I probably work 100 hours, but I know that there's been points where I'm like, I just can't do it. Yeah. And we shouldn't be encouraging this culture, because it's detrimental to, well, women, but people who care for, family members, and that could be men. And we need to rethink. I know it's like, again, it's like, why are we still talking about this? This is the business case for diversity and inclusion. But there needs to be a radical rethinking of organization of work, performance KPIs for senior executives, and really changing the culture at the very top.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up now. I'd like to thank my established panel. Thank you very much, Tracey, Russ, Roni, and Mimi. And thank you all for joining and listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.